So good morning. In this video I'm going to talk about the Telesin ND filter for Insta360 1R 1-inch edition. I bought it on Lazada for 968 pesos, and I think the shipping fee is 100 plus. So included in the box has ND8, ND16 and ND32. This is the only brand that I found online, and I think here in Philippines, this is also the only brand selling an ND filter for Insta360 1-inch. I'm going to show some footages taken with Insta360 1R 1-inch without the ND filter, and with ND16, ND8 and ND32. So I always use the ND16 ND filter. I seldom use the ND32, but maybe if it's too bright, that's the time for me to use ND32. So why do we use ND filter in our video? So we use ND filter in order for us to get the cinematic look, or the motion blur, the natural looking motion blur. So if we don't have an ND filter attached to our lens, we will not be able to make our shutter speed slower. So there's no motion blur. As you can see in most of the videos taken using action camera like GoPro, Insta360, there's no motion blur. If you're going to pause the video or the footage, you can see a motion blur because the shutter speed is too fast. So we need to make our shutter speed slower to get that motion or natural looking motion blur. So if you're not after getting that motion blur, it's okay. It is much better if you use the original filter. I'm here in front of the City Hall of Coronadal, and I will show you the difference between the footages taken with the original filter and using the ND filter. So first, here's the footage from Insta360 1R using the original filter. Using our 180-degree rule, which I am using 30 FPS, so I should shoot with 1/30 or 1/60 shutter speed. It's overexposed. So in order for us to get the proper exposure, we need to adjust the shutter speed. I've adjusted the shutter speed. Now it's 1/800. I'm still using ISO 100. Okay, so I think this is the correct exposure, correct settings. I'm going to put the ND filter now. I'll use the ND16. So using the previous settings that we have, ISO 100, then shutter speed 1/800, this is what we get. We are going to adjust again the shutter speed in order for us to get the proper exposure. So right now I'm using ISO 100, then 1/60 shutter speed. So this is the correct settings that we should use. As I've mentioned earlier, we need to double our frame rate. So we have 30 FPS or 30 frames per second. Now I'm using 1/60 of a second shutter speed. So this is perfect, and we can see our clouds are properly exposed, and we can also get motion blur. So if I'm going to wave my hand and we are going to pause the video, you'll see the motion blur. So I will no longer put the ND8 and ND32. It's the same concept. You just need to change the ISO and of course the shutter speed in order for you to get the correct exposure. Then of course we are using an action camera, so we don't have an option to change the aperture. Then I'm going to put back the original filter again. So this is the original filter, lens filter from Insta360 1R. I'm just going to show you how it looks if I'm going to wave my hand. So then I'll pause the video. There is no motion blur. To moving cars. Okay, so it doesn't look natural. Then I'm now going to show you samples of footages with the ND filter and without the ND filter. Okay, so thank you for watching. So here is one of the video that I use the 180-degree shutter rule and using the ND filter. Some of the parts are okay, but there are some jittery parts, even though I did the ninja walk. So it doesn't look good. The stabilization doesn't work well if you're using this 180-degree rule. I was amazed with the stabilization of Insta360 if you're using a higher shutter speed. If you're just standing and doing a panning shot, then it's fine. Or if you are, of course, if you're using a tripod or maybe a stabilizer, then it's great to use the 180-degree rule or a slower shutter speed. In this video, I'm holding the Insta360 1R 1-inch with ND filter, so there are some jittery parts. I think this is much better as I walk so slow. And this is a panning shot, so it works fine. This one is fine. Here is a sample of a time lapse with ND filter or with a slower shutter speed. Okay, so thank you for watching.